Hi there everybody. The Home Affairs Select Committee met to hear the accounts from both Graham Smith, Chief Executive of anti-monarchy protest group Republic, and Suzie Melvin, a volunteer from the support group Night Stars. Both were arrested in the early hours of the morning of the coronation of Charles and detained for up to 16 hours, alongside 7 other members of Republic and 2 other Night Stars. This committee went on for a while, so I have edited it down to purely Tory members of the committee displaying their remarkable combination of ignorance, snowflakery, childishness, and, perhaps most importantly, elements of fascism. Now, I appreciate this is a lengthy watch, so I will play it through uninterrupted. However, it's a fascinating example of just how dangerous this current crop of Tories have the potential to truly be. I should also point out Adam Wagner, a distinguished barrister specialising in protest law, is also there to offer his opinion. I've added timestamps to the video so you can skip through to the various key parts, and also just listen out every now and again for the background chuntering of Lee Anderson, especially within the first 30 seconds when Graham Smith is introducing himself. Enjoy, because this is eye-opening stuff.
I'd like to start by asking each of our panel members just to introduce themselves and explain why they're here today. So, Graham, would you like to start?
Yeah, I'm Graham Smith. I'm CEO of Republic and one of the 8 people, not 6, who were arrested from Republic on May 6 without any lawful justification.
Thank you.
I'm Adam Wagner, and I'm a barrister at Doughty Street Chambers, and I am an expert in protest law.
Thank you.
I'm Suzie Melvin. I'm one of the 3 Night Stars who was arrested.
Thank you. So what we'd like to do really is to start just actually by asking Graham and Suzie if you could just explain what actually happened, if you could just tell your story to us. We appreciate that you've obviously been through a difficult and traumatic experience, so please just take your time. We just want to hear what happened to you.
Thank you, and I appreciate those last comments, because some people have tried to downplay the arrest and detention of people as an inconvenience. It is a traumatic experience for people and should be taken very, very seriously. I had written to the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police in January. We had 2 meetings with senior officers on the 8th of February and the 24th of March, as well as a number of phone call conversations and email exchanges with a junior officer who was our dedicated liaison officer. We had been abundantly clear with them right the way through the process exactly what we were planning to do. We told them how many placards we would have and what they would say on them. We told them that we would have these large flags that you would have seen in the footage. We told them that we would have amplifiers for the purposes of making speeches to the crowd. We told them we would have megaphones. We gave them a map which showed them where we would have the main protest and that there would be other smaller protests on the Mall and on Whitehall. We gave them every piece of information we possibly could. It's possible that the occasional tiny minutiae might have slipped through and not been communicated, but they were very clear with us that they did not have a single concern about any of the things which we told them that we were going to do. When we told them, for example, that we had these 3-metre flags, they said that they would be concerned that they might fall into the parade route, and so we made it abundantly clear that we would be keeping them back well away from the parade route towards the back of the crowd. So at all stages, and it should be obviously noted that we are under no obligation whatsoever to communicate with the police. It's a static protest which does not require permission, but we were concerned by an arrest that occurred in 2011 on the day of William and Kate's wedding, and arrests that happened and threats of arrest that happened immediately after the death of the Queen. So we were keen to engage, and we gave them every possible cooperation and involvement. And during that time, we had protests in 5 other cities, or 4 other cities and London, in which were peaceful, where we engaged with the liaison officers, where those officers were professional and helpful. And we never had any intention of doing anything which even came close to falling outside of the law. And the claim that they had intelligence could not possibly be true. Either they're being dishonest or they are making a very serious error, because you cannot have intelligence relating to Republic, because there was not a single email, text message WhatsApp message, conversation, fleeting remark, or anything that would suggest at all that we had any intention of doing anything unlawful or disruptive. We were also told, because we said to them in these meetings, would you obviously make sure that everybody on the ground understands what we're doing? And they said yes, and that people, including the bronze commanders, had been fully briefed as to what was going on. So on the day, we had stayed the previous 2 nights in a hotel on St Martin's Lane. We went down to Trafalgar Square at 6 o'clock in the morning with a number of pieces of equipment, including our flags and amplification equipment. We were immediately approached by a number of officers, including the bronze commander, who seemed not being helpful, but seemed quite hostile and seemed to give the impression that they didn't know who we were, what we were doing, and what our intentions were. And they were I actually texted them a message to the liaison officer saying, "Your officers are being somewhat difficult." I then went up the road to meet my colleague who was driving the van down from North London with the placards. He was having some difficulty navigating, so I jumped in the van with him and we parked up on St Martin's Lane. We opened the back of the door and immediately we were surrounded by large numbers of tactical support group officers who were not in remotely friendly or helpful mindset. They immediately told us to stop what we were doing. I attempted to phone the liaison officer and he told me that he was therefore detaining me and did not allow me to do that. I attempted again and he seized my wrist and removed my phone from my hand and again told me I could not do that. I told him that we had had these meetings with a superintendent and a civil commander. He said, what was the name of that person? I told him, he clearly recognised that name and he said that did not matter. I repeated that we had had these meetings, as did a colleague of mine also repeat that. They obviously had no reason to believe that we had anything on the van other than the placards, which is not an offence, obviously. It's not an offence to park up and unload placards. We had 2 large trolleys which we had hired, and the straps were there to strap the large bundles of placards to the trolleys so that we could quickly and efficiently, with minimal disruption, get them down onto Trafalgar Square. The straps would have gone back into the van. The van was then going to be driven back to North London and left there for the duration of the day.
In your extensive discussions with the police, had you mentioned these straps?
No, because we hadn't realised until we had them delivered a few days earlier that they were quite cumbersome to move. So I simply went on Amazon, found the first straps I saw, picked them mainly because they were yellow, which matched everything else we were carrying, and threw them in the van, still in the packaging. So and they are not physically capable. As our solicitor pointed out when she arrived at the station, and as they, I believe, have now accepted, that they were not physically capable of locking people on. They may have the combination lock, but they also have an adjuster like any bag strap. They're quite long. They're also very easy to cut. So they're not particularly heavy duty. They are the sort of strap you might strap around your case if you're going into an airport.
Is there anything else you want to tell us at this point? We will want to ask you some further questions.
Of course. Well, only that I'm very concerned by the statements that have been made today by the police and in the letter that they sent to Sadiq Khan. There's a lot of claims there which are simply untrue. And I'm concerned by the suggestion that we were there for 16 hours partly because of processing. I know the officer told me at 1 p.m. in the afternoon that he was ready to interview me, and after that I could go. I was then told just a couple of days ago that our solicitor arrived around 1 p.m. It was 6 p.m. before I was interviewed, and I was the first of our 8 to be interviewed, or the first of the 6 in that station. So I would really like to, I would hope that this committee can get answers as to whether there was political interference, who made what decision, and whether this is premeditated, because it certainly had the impression that they had turned up with the intention of detaining us. And I would also, just very quickly, I appreciate time, the notion that we were still able to protest. We weren't, we were in cells, but the protest was significantly disrupted and diminished as a result of their actions. They continued throughout the day. They confiscated our amplifiers, even though they had said that we were allowed to use them. They threatened arrest of the people with megaphones and then arrested 2 people with megaphones. And I do know for a fact that large numbers of people then left or didn't turn up because of those arrests.
Right, okay, thank you. Suzie, would you just explain what happened in your case?
So we commenced the Night Star shift at 7 p.m. on Friday the 5th of May, and as part of the Night Stars we patrol various areas including Soho, Leicester Square, the embankment. And so we were walking around, myself and my colleagues, with our rucksacks, high visibility vests, and the rucksacks would contain things like bottles of water, sick bags, slippers, lollipops, hairbands, ponchos, anything you'd need at the end of a night out, really. And as we were walking around, we were speaking to members of the police force, as we always do when we're on patrol. Most of the night, it was quite quiet compared to a normal Friday night. So we were mainly giving directions to people from outside of London as to where they could go to watch the coronation. So we'd gone back to St Anne's Church, which is where we based ourselves out of, and had some dinner. And myself and my two colleagues I was arrested with, we'd made the decision that because it was quite a quiet night, we'd do a final circuit around Soho, which is generally the busiest area, and then we would go home. So we started walking towards Soho, and Soho Square is always the last area that we would patrol because there's often people waiting for taxis on their own there. And a large part of our role is trying to keep people safe, particularly towards the end of a night out. So if we see people who are on their own waiting for an Uber, say, we'll offer to wait with them so that they can feel safer and they're not at risk of sort of incurring any crime. So as we were entering the north side of Soho Square, we were approached by a number of TSG vans, and then a large number of officers got out of vans and they approached us and said that they were going to stop and search us. So we were kept separate, and the officers looked through our bags, checked our pockets. We explained to them who the Night Stars were, showed them emails from Westminster City Council, showed them the Night Stars website. We gave them leaflets which had been printed by Westminster City Council, our high visibility vests, which do display the Met Police logo as well, because we're in partnership with the Met Police, have a QR code on them which links back to the Westminster City Council website as well.
Sorry to interrupt you. Did you say then you're in partnership? You work in partnership with the Metropolitan Police?
Yes.
Okay, right. Sorry to interrupt.
No problems. So we did the best that we could to try and explain who we were to the officers, and then they also searched the church that we based ourselves out of. And we were then taken in police vans we were told we were going to be arrested and taken in police vans to Woolworth police station, where we were held. I was interviewed at approximately 1 o'clock in the afternoon the following day, and then we were released a little bit after 4 o'clock on Saturday the 6th of May.
Goodness, that's such a long time for you to be detained.
Yes, it was, yeah.
Right, okay. I'm a bit speechless, actually, having heard that account of what happened to you and your colleagues. Right, okay, well, thank you both for setting out so clearly what happened. That's very helpful to the committee. We're going to have some questions. So, Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. My question is for Graham. Thank you for coming, Graham, today. Now, after your arrest and the time spent in the cells, my inbox sort of exploded a little bit, and people were saying that it was right that you was arrested. You described as a trouble causer, a public nuisance, and you're just there to ruin people's days out. That's their words, not mine. I've looked at your website, and it says that you embrace democracy. So I guess my question, I've only got one question for you, is if you embrace democracy so much, why don't you put your placards away and stand for election?
I don't know that that's particularly relevant to the inquiry.
I think we're interested in what happened to you on that day and whether the law was appropriately and properly
I'm happy
applied.
to sit here and tell you all about why the monarchy is a bad thing and why we should be a republic, but I think we are actually focusing on the policing.
Okay.
We haven't got time to go into all of that today. I'm sure we would like to perhaps have that discussion, Lee.
That's my question.
Right,
That's my question.
thank you very much. Okay, Tim Loughton.
Thank you, Chair. Mrs Smith, can I just preface my question to you by saying I'm sure there are people on this committee who fundamentally disagree with your views and that of the organisation, and those who fundamentally agree. That is not the point of today's questioning. All of us agreed on your right to protest your cause. The issue is the proportionality and the policing of that. Can you tell me what you and your organisation hoped to achieve on the day of the coronation?
We were very clear in the run-up to this that we wanted to essentially challenge what, in our view, was not a national celebration but a royal and state celebration, which polls were showing, a minority were enthusiastic about. We wanted to use the opportunity to get our message across, which is that in a democracy we should have an election instead of a coronation, and that instead of being told it's going to be Charles, we ought to have a choice of our head of state. And we wanted to be very clear in front of the world's cameras that we are not a nation of royalists, that whilst that view is often projected in the media, the polling shows that the people's views are quite nuanced and divided. So we wanted to create that debate and get people's voices heard. I appreciate that obviously still a majority support the retention of the monarchy, but the polling is very different. So we would essentially, like any protest group, we wanted to be very clear about our message and get that message out to a wide audience.
Do you think that actually you were more successful in getting publicity for your organisation and your cause by the fact that 8 of your members, including you, were arrested, which seems to have scored rather more headlines and today's proceedings here than if none of you had been arrested at all?
Well, I wouldn't say the word successful. I would say that is the case, that we had more coverage. It wasn't a success in the sense that we didn't aim to do that, and I would not wish to do that. It was a very heavy price to pay for that coverage, both in terms of the loss of liberty of 8 of our people, both staff and volunteers, for a whole day, and all the stress that comes with that, as well as the very serious impact on people's rights to protest. I would much rather that the police had honoured their assurances and allowed us to get on with the protest as we had planned.
You've just said that your aim was to get maximum publicity for your cause and your beliefs. That's perfectly reasonable. But by having those 8 people arrested and subsequently what has happened made it impossible to ignore, which is what you wanted, wasn't it?
Yes, but as I said, it wasn't our objective. So successful for us, we were very clear, what a successful day meant for us was to be able to peacefully protest, to have speeches, to be near the procession route, and during that peaceful protest to attract attention through the national and international media. So that was successful in our mind, and that did not happen. So yes, by implication, or whatever, as a result of those arrests, we got much more publicity. But that is not successful in our minds as a peaceful campaign.
As part of those intended activities would have made it impossible to ignore?
Well, the fact that we were there in fairly large numbers right on the edge of the procession, and we had other protests along the route, and that by doing that we were engaging with the media, who would have had and certainly the broadcast media would have had an obligation to engage with the fact that there are both protesters and also a diversity of opinion around the issue. So
that didn't happen, did it? Because I can't recall any footage of your organisation protesters in Trafalgar Square. I absolutely, as does everybody else, recall what happened to 8 of your protesters.
Indeed, but I would certainly be taking that up with the BBC, because I have complained to them many times that their coverage of royal events is atrocious, and the fact that they didn't cover it is something you'll have to take up with them.
Okay, well, we can all complain about the BBC in various terms, but what I'm just interested in is on your website, I quote, it says, on Saturday the 6th of May, the eyes of the world will be on the coronation. I would agree with that. This is the moment we make our objection loud, visible, and impossible to ignore, and you invited people to sign up for that. So what really was your intention? Doesn't anybody reading that could get the impression that actually there was something rather more severe planned, a peaceful demonstration involving a few placards which may or may not be ferried to the place of protest by some combination luggage straps?
No, because there is obviously, we have a history of peaceful protest. We have been very clear about what that protest would look like. It was going to be, we had about 2,000 people already telling us that they would be there, and they would be amassed in a crowd on Trafalgar Square, and if the cameras and the BBC and everybody else was covering it reasonably and fairly, then you would see it as part of the coronation coverage. That was our plan. Now, whether that would have worked, I don't know, but that was the plan. We are a peaceful campaign group, we always have been. And we have never had any intention of causing any disruption, as we have made clear to not just the Met, but every other police force where we have protested. So, no, it is not reasonable to make any conclusions.
What is your definition of disruption? You've said that you had loudspeaker equipment and megaphones, where there were the majority of people who located themselves on the route were there to enjoy the spectacle, the bands, the music that went with it. But do you not agree that if you had somebody bellowing with the use of a megaphone and loudspeakers, things that were contrary to what people have come there to see, that surely is disruptive for the many hundreds of thousands of people who come there to enjoy spectacle and the music and everything to go with it?
Well, arguably, yes. But I mean, the point is that there were people there who were there to demonstrate their support for the monarchy, and there were people there that were demonstrating their opposition to the monarchy, and both had equal rights to be there. And there were far more of them, so therefore the noise for them would be louder than us. There were more of them, so they would be more visible. There was plenty of space where people could watch the procession without us
Why
being
was
in
it
their
necessary to have megaphones and loudspeaker equipment if it was not intended to be disruptive?
The disruption that we're talking about in the context of this discussion is the sort of disruption of locking on, getting into the route and that sort of thing. If we talk about disruption in terms of diminishing their PR, that's a whole different matter.
No,
yes.
Is a megaphone and use of loudspeakers where people are there to listen and take in the spectacle, not by your own definition disruptive, which is what actually you intended to be?
Well, obviously protest wants to be...
is it disruptive
noticed.
or not, Mr. Smith?
It's disruptive only in the sense that it is disrupting the PR aspect of the parade.
PR. It's about hundreds of thousands of people who come there to enjoy the spectacle and listen to the music and various other.
Thousands of people...
The use of a megaphone and loudspeakers to drown over that noise is, by your own definition, disruptive, which is what your intention was it not?
We raised these matters with the police, and they were very clear that it did not breach the law, simply because we could not physically disrupt the piece, because there were many more of them than there were of us. So even with amplification, they had no concerns with it. And I should say, again, they were abundantly clear that they had absolutely no concerns about any of our plans whatsoever, right up until Friday, the 5th of May. Right. So, these are not disruptive in the sense that you're trying to suggest.
I think this language is really interesting. Disruption that Mr. Loughton's been talking about, aggressive protest, passive protest. Protest is about getting yourself heard particularly by people in power, but also by your fellow citizens. And I think that in a way, the perfect protest movement is a mass protest movement where you've got in lots of people who agree because you've convinced them that is the right method of, it's the right idea. And the problem, these laws are really focusing in on those mass protest movements, and they're making them a lot more difficult to organise. And I think the genesis of the Powers and the Public Order Bill came originally after Extinction Rebellion. They weren't a response to insulate Britain and sort of road blockages. They were about the mass protests in Extinction Rebellion, which were, the most part, peaceful and creative and engaging. They engaged people with the ideas. They were very politically focused. And I think that we should be encouraging that in society. And one of the reasons is we want new ideas. It's really important. But the other reason is it's always seen, I think a good democracy understands that protest is the release of a safety valve. It's a release of pressure to allow people to go out and say, this is what I feel, and this is important to me, and to do it in a way which is a bargain. And in the case law, in the courts, they talk about civil disobedience and the bargain between the society and the individuals. And it's worrying that you heard Mr. Loughton's questions for me were quite sort of almost quite sinister. And I don't mean that as a personal point. I just mean the questioning itself, as in, you bring a loudspeaker to a coronation, to a political event. It's not just everybody enjoying themselves. It's a very highly political event, the coronation of a constitutional monarch, in a system where people disagree and agree vehemently with whether there should or shouldn't be a king. And I think the idea that you could not bring a loudspeaker to a protest, which is almost the sort of bread and butter of mass protests, is a loudspeaker amplification, is really worrying. And I think that's the direction of travel, that you have politicians saying, well, you were just trying to disrupt things with your loudspeaker by getting, but people are just enjoying themselves. I think that's really worrying. I think it's worrying for democracy. And I think we need to, we're in the early stages of it, but I think we need to sort of just take a check now.
Mr. Wagner, you're not here as a lawyer, are you? You're here as a political activist. You're giving political opinions, which, calling my colleague Mr. Loughton sinister, is a new one for this committee.
Yeah.
But if you are here as a political activist and you have set political views, it was up to the committee who they wanted to invite.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you there, James, because we invited Adam along because he'd worked with the Joint Committee on Human Rights. Is a very distinguished lawyer, and we wanted to have that expertise at this hearing.
Distinguished lawyers are calling members of Parliament sinister.
Rude.
Well, rude. I'm not going to stop you asking your questions, but I just want to make it clear that Mr. Wagner is a very experienced and expert in the field of human rights law, and that's why we've got him here today.
Expert at what? Insulting people.
God's sake.
Well, nobody's insulting anybody in this room, so let's be clear about that. And we're not making this personal. We're looking at the facts of what happened, and we're trying to get to the point where we understand decisions and why they were made. So perhaps if we do it on that level, James.
Mr. Smith.
Sorry, can I just respond to that? I didn't mean at all, and I said it wasn't personal. I just found that the idea that you question the head of a protest movement for bringing a loudspeaker, I think it's a sign of something really difficult and dangerous in our democracy. That we're sort of
Use the word sinister, Mr. Wagner. Nobody else.
I thought the questioning was sinister. I'm sorry. I did think it was.
Mr. Smith, one of the concerns I have in respect to this hearing is that and this has been raised before, is we appear to be having a discussion regarding a set of circumstances where some of the people involved in this are not here. So you've given your take, you've accused people of being dishonest and various other things. There is no way of me testing that evidence here, because the police officers who were present, who arrested you, have not been invited before this committee, are not able to give their side of the story. So I don't really know what I can ask in respect to that, because as far as I can see, that from the information that we have, you came down here to protest, and the police officers appear to have taken a view in respect of, based upon intelligence and on respect of some of the items that were either close to you or in your possession, in the possession of the other people who were arrested, that they had legal grounds to arrest you. I mean, that's basically all we can establish, isn't it? You dispute that. They say they did have legal grounds, and that's that, isn't it? That's basically the height of what we can talk about here today. If we are going to get into the point where select committees of this House are turning themselves actually into courts, we're into a very difficult set of circumstances there.
Well, I don't think that's the case. I mean, you're more than welcome to invite the 50 members of the Strategic Tactical Support Group here to... Absolutely. Well, that's entirely up to the chair of the committee, but...
I apologise for interrupting you. Can I just make it clear that when we contacted the Metropolitan Police, we did ask, I think, James, you'd requested this, that we had officers who were on the front line that day who could come and give evidence, or not give evidence, explain what happened. And the Metropolitan Police took the decision that they would send Assistant Commissioner Twist. That was their decision. Then, so that's why we're in the position we are today, just so everyone's clear.
You know,
I think that the set of circumstances that were in play at the time, and I think that the police were put in a position where they were protecting and looking to protect the safety of hundreds of thousands of people, together with horses and other people involved in the coronation. And it is curious to me, Mr. Smith, that you never once mention your concern or the issue of the public protection of hundreds of thousands of people as an important factor in what's going through your intention when you're going there.
We had discussions about that with the police. We said that we did our own risk assessments. We took advice. We took decisions in relation to what we were doing and how we were doing it. We had our own volunteer welfare officer recruited. We had other people specifically to manage and hold the large flags. We were very clear about our impact on the people around us. We have had protests in other cities where we have engaged with the people around us in good humour, and we have made it very clear that we're not protesting against them, but we are protesting against the monarchy. So, you know, it is...
Just going on from that, tell me what it is, specifically, in the Public Order Act that you disagree with, that you dispute, that you think is not needed in response to the concerns of the constituents I represent and all of my colleagues.
I think if there is a law that allows people to be rounded up without evidence and detained for 16...
Wrong.
It's not wrong, excuse me.
Well, 100% incorrect what you've just said.
100%. Well, you might want to talk to the young woman from Australia who was rounded up without evidence and ask her about that, because she spent hours...
How do you know that? Listen, if there's a set of circumstances where... I was a criminal lawyer, Mr. Smith, for 17 years. I've dealt with, like Mr. Wagner, with many, many cases of unlawful arrest. You are creating the impression that this is some unique situation. This is a situation that it happens every single day throughout the country in every police force.
What, unlawful arrest?
Well, I think...
Absolutely. The circumstances...
Well, can I just...
Scotland, it doesn't.
Okay, one at a time, and I think if you want to respond to that, and then I'm going to take Marco Longhi. Yeah.
I mean, I can just reiterate, there was not a single piece of evidence of any intent or capacity to commit any crime when they detained us for searching. And they then released a statement saying we'd been arrested under conspiracy to cause a public nuisance, which was not correct. They then later re-arrested me for that in order to make my arrest record match their press statement. It had all the hallmarks of being predetermined. And as I said, it was said earlier by, I think, Mr. Twist, is it? That, you know, they tried to be as helpful as possible. That was absolutely the opposite of what they did now. Now, I have, as I said, done many other protests where they have been very helpful, where we have discussed things. What they could have done on that day, and this is an important point as a contrast, one officer could have come up and asked us who we were. They could have then spoken to the liaison officer. They could have, if they said, look, do you mind if we look in the van? We said, absolutely, of course, go for it. If they raised concerns about the straps, we would have explained, as we did, what they were for. We would have told them that they would have been put back in the van and the van was going back to North London, and we could have carried on our way. But instead they detained us, they confiscated the placards and then continued to disrupt and diminish the protest all the way through the day.
Right, okay, James,
I don't accept that for a second, and that's completely contradicted by the evidence of the police. And we are turning this hearing simply into giving you a platform to say things which there is no possibility whereby, and the evidential basis that we can challenge in this room, and therefore I don't know why.
Okay, well, we're not a court of law. We've just invited people to give their account of what happened. Evidence. We're not a court of law, James. Right.
Mr. Smith, you've made a big play today on the fact that you engaged a lot with the police, and I clearly commend you for doing so. But would you also accept that it is a well-known thing that protest groups of all sorts might describe an intent with a view to perhaps misleading, and therefore this is something that the policing authorities, again having to take a risk-based approach, have to consider whether that position is entirely correct. You have seen today that people came in wearing particular clothing. The intention was to sit behind witnesses and to simply observe proceedings, but actually what they did was completely different. So they themselves, and I'm not wanting you to compare you clearly to Just Stop Oil, but that policing authorities have to also take a view, a risk-based view, which is whatever is being said to them might not be entirely be the case, because there could be even an intent to mislead in order to achieve their outcomes.
Well, indeed, obviously, but I think that the point with us is that we had been speaking to them for 4 months, and they had made it abundantly clear that they had no concerns. Even on I think the Thursday or the Friday beforehand, they issued a statement because there was some concern around other statements that had been made about having low tolerance of protest. They issued another statement saying, or they were quoted in the Telegraph, I think it was, saying that they would engage with us and allow us to continue with our protest. And it's been pointed out by the police officers, and I think elsewhere, that they would also, it's not good enough to simply see someone in possession of something which may or may not be a lock-on device. They need evidence of, or reasonable grounds for suspicion of intent, which they couldn't possibly have had because there was nothing in anything we had done, said or thought or communicated that would suggest such intent. And as I said, it's also about a proportion. As I've just described, they could have simply had a conversation with us. Now, their hostile tone from the moment they turned up made it very clear that they were not interested in any such discussions. I mean, as I said before, I immediately said, we have had these conversations. I named the superintendent we'd met in person. I named the liaison officer and attempted to phone her, and he twice stopped me from doing that, including grabbing my wrist and removing the phone from my hand. So there was no engagement at all. And as I understand it from the letter, I believe, and I think it was said before, that the arresting officer spoke to the bronze commander, and I also know that the bronze commander was engaged and briefed and all the rest of it. So, yes, it may happen, but if we are going to have it so broad that we just say, well, these things may theoretically happen, therefore we can arrest you because you have something which may theoretically be used to lock on. I mean, I've turned up today with 5 lock-on devices on my person. You know, my tie, my watch, my belt, and 2 shoelaces. Now, you know, someone could have phoned up the Met and said, well, he's planning to lock himself to the chair when he's during the middle of the committee. And should I spend 16 hours in detention for that so-called intelligence and those so-called lock-on devices? I mean, there has to be quite a serious...
With respect, I'm sorry to interrupt because I'm very mindful of time. You can't really make such flippant comparisons, given, as I described just a few moments ago to Miss Melvin, that the events of the day were clearly extremely high stakes, extremely tense, for all sorts of different reasons, and that if a police officer is given reasonable doubt and suspicion that something perhaps untoward could happen in that particular context, which maybe on a different day with a different context might be interpreted differently, they perhaps had no choice but to take the actions they took.
I think the
Marco, I don't think we need to rehearse this again. I think there's obviously a clear...
But the response I received before about shoelaces, with greatest respect, Madam Chair, is a flippant response to a valid point I was making.
All I would say is repeat the fact that, you know, there were many, many things he could have done short of the heavy-handed arrest of me and my colleagues.
Right. Loughton.
Can I just ask Mr. Wagner, and I'll try not to be sinister.
Yesterday.
We've only concentrated on the Republic protesters. Do you think that those who were arrested from Just Stop Oil were treated unfairly?
I don't know the individual facts of those cases at all. I mean, and it's not for me to say whether it was fair or not. It's just a question of whether it's lawful, and I just don't know.
So, can I thank all three of you, Graham, Adam, and Suzie? I think it's been you've been asked some quite challenging questions, but I think it's legitimate. I'm not saying they're not legitimate, but they've been challenging. But we very much appreciate, particularly Graham and Suzie, being able to come and talk to us today and explain what happened. We very much appreciate that, and can I wish you all well. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Chair.